Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a number that is about to radically alter corporate strategy, regulatory environments, and tax liabilities. If you're a corporate strategist, an audience manager, or a management student, well, you know that the business landscape is driven by data. But what happens when the underlying data isn't some fixed law of physics, but a highly debated, incredibly fluid societal calculation? We're going to dive into a groundbreaking 2022 Nature paper by Rennert and colleagues that introduces a totally new model for calculating the cost of climate change. And we're going to deconstruct this research to show exactly how societal conflicts over numbers translate directly into your corporate reality. Okay, let's just jump right into it and look at this single pretty intimidating number, $185 per metric ton of carbon dioxide. This serves as the ultimate metric informing worldwide climate policies and corporate accounting right now. It's the new mean estimate calculated by the Greenhouse Gas Impact Value Estimator, or the GIVE model, which is what this research centers on. Now, it might just look like 3 digits on a screen, but this figure represents an absolute seismic shift in how governments and decision-makers are going to conduct benefit-cost analyses for years to come.
To put that into perspective, we are looking at a massive 3.6-fold shock to the corporate system. That is a huge jump from the current, widely used U.S. government baseline of $51 all the way up to this newly calculated $185. Think about that for a second. For over a decade, organizations have been out there optimizing their compliance, forecasting carbon taxes, and projecting regulatory costs based on a $51 baseline. This new estimate completely upends that math. It vastly increases the expected net benefits of adopting stringent greenhouse gas mitigation policies. And that brings us to a really core dilemma for any manager. If a societal debate changes your regulatory liability by over 360%, does your 10-year strategic plan actually survive? This is an absolutely crucial lesson, especially for management students. The numbers you plug into your long-term forecasting models, they aren't etched in stone. They are the output of a constantly evolving scientific, economic, and demographic consensus. Understanding how these numbers are built is quite literally the only way to anticipate how they might change next. So, to understand this massive shift, we really need to define exactly what this number even is. The social cost of carbon, or SCCO2, is the monetized value of the damages to society caused by an incremental metric ton of CO2 emissions. Think of it as the price tag of climate change per unit of pollution. But assigning a neat little dollar value to future global damages, that requires bridging a massive gap between atmospheric chemistry, global agriculture, human mortality, and economics. It is a highly negotiated societal calculation that directly shapes policy.
So let's get into part 1, opening the black box and seeing how this number is built.
The crucial point here is that this 4-step integrated assessment model is exactly where science meets economics to calculate your future corporate liabilities. The researchers built the GIVE model to update all 4 of these essential steps. First, they project global population and GDP over the next 3 centuries. Step 2, they use those projections to model emissions and temperature changes. Step 3, they calculate the actual economic damages of that warming. And finally, Step 4, they discount those future damages back to present-day dollars. And trust me, every single one of these steps involves intense societal debate.
Moving on to part 2, calculating climate damages and evaluating human impact.
Now, when you break down this monolithic $185 number into distinct societal impacts, it reveals something kind of surprising. Out of the total, human mortality is the single biggest driver, contributing $90. Agriculture adds $84. Meanwhile, energy consumption shifts contribute $9. And sea level rise, which, let's be honest, usually gets the most media attention, only contributes $2. You might be wondering, why is that? Well, because the model factors in that humans will adapt to sea level rise by doing things like moving or building seawalls, which lowers those long-term damages. Heat-related impacts on human health and crop yields, on the other hand, are far more immediate and much harder to avoid.
This visual perfectly communicates the intense uncertainty that you, as a strategist, must manage. Notice the massive spread on the agriculture estimates. The economic damages from agricultural shifts could be minor, or they could be absolutely devastating. This huge variance happens because the interactions between CO2 fertilization, which, believe it or not, can actually help some crops grow, and heat stress, which destroys them, are incredibly complex. Compare that to the much tighter uncertainty bands you see around sea level rise or energy. Your corporate strategy has to be robust enough to survive the extremes of these probability distributions. Let's zoom in a bit on that $90 mortality figure. To get this number, economists use a concept called the value of a statistical life. It's essentially calculating what society is willing to pay to reduce the risk of death. As a manager, you really have to recognize that these deeply philosophical, societal debates over how to value human life across different countries and future generations, they translate directly into your bottom-line corporate reality. When health experts update their mortality models, your compliance costs will inevitably shift. All right, part 3, discounting the future and the time value of society.
So the discount rate represents a core societal conflict. It's a mathematical calculation of how heavily we weight the well-being of tomorrow versus the economy of today. Because CO2 stays in the atmosphere for centuries, the damages caused by a ton emitted today will happen far, far in the future. The discount rate determines how much we, sitting here today, actually care about those future damages. A high discount rate? That means we care mostly about the present. A low discount rate means we're placing a really high value on protecting future generations.
It's a bit ironic that something as mundane as central bank interest rates can completely upend global climate models, right? But notice how tweaking a seemingly minor percentage shifts the entire bell curve of the cost. The researchers pointed out that over the last 30 years, real interest rates have steadily declined. And because the discount rate is tied to economic growth and interest rates, they argue that the historically used 3% rate is totally outdated. A 2% rate is far more scientifically and economically accurate today. Just look at how dramatically the distribution pushes the cost of carbon higher when you move from 3% to 2%.
Let's break those numbers down further. Look closely at how a drop from a 3% to a 2% rate swings the cost from $80 all the way up to $185. And if society, through its policymakers and economists, decides to lower that rate even further to 1.5%, the cost absolutely rockets to $308 per ton. This proves without a doubt that a societal choice about the value of the future dictates financial reality today. In fact, the single largest reason for the jump from the old $51 estimate to the new $185 estimate isn't just new climate science. It's a fundamental shift in economic discounting.
Which brings us to part 4, the manager's new reality and strategic adaptability.
Let's bring this all back to the boardroom. Remember, these figures are not fixed facts. They are highly negotiated metrics. This paper comprehensively proves that as our scientific understanding of mortality in agriculture improves, and as our economic baseline for interest rate shifts, the cost of carbon is going to rise. This 3.6-fold increase will aggressively dictate future worldwide climate policies, making stricter regulations much easier to justify in government benefit cost analyses. So your long-term corporate strategy can no longer rely on static assumptions. You literally have to build adaptability into your business model to handle the fluid nature of these metrics.
So, knowing that the regulatory ground beneath you is built on evolving societal assumptions, we have to ask, is your organization prepared for the next recalculation? Because as this research clearly shows, the models will keep updating, society will keep renegotiating its values, and the numbers driving your industry will inevitably change again. The best managers out there won't just react to the $185 price tag, they'll understand exactly how it was built, and they'll be ready for whatever number comes next.